While the world was watching bombs fall on Tehran, while the breaking news alerts were coming in faster than anyone could process them, something was happening inside the United States Capitol that most Americans completely missed. Senators were being called back to Washington, not for a regular session, not for a scheduled vote, for an emergency, because the most consequential war powers debate in a generation was about to explode on the floor of the United States Senate. And the people who are supposed to represent you, the 100 men and women you sent to Washington to be the check on presidential power, were scattered across the country, some of them asleep, some of them watching the news from their living rooms, most of them finding out about Operation Epic Fury the same way you did, from their phones. Think about that. The United States just launched the most significant military operation in a generation. Bombs are dropping on a foreign capital. The supreme leader of Iran is dead. American military personnel are under fire in multiple countries across the Middle East. The Strait of Hormuz is closed, the global economy is already reacting, and the majority of the United States Congress, the branch of government that the Constitution explicitly gives the power to declare war, was not consulted, was not asked, was not briefed, was not in the room. They were notified, after the fact, by phone, in the middle of the night, and now they are being called back to Washington to cast a vote that could, or could not, change everything. This is the story of that vote, and it is every bit as important as anything happening on the ground in Iran. Here is the thing about war powers votes. They almost never make the front page. They almost never trend on social media. They don't have explosions or satellite imagery or dramatic truth social posts at 2:30 in the morning. They are just votes, procedural, dry, easy to scroll past. But they are the mechanism, the actual constitutional mechanism by which the American people exercise control over whether their country goes to war. And this week, that mechanism is being activated in the most high-stakes environment in years. Senate Decode exists to explain exactly this kind of moment. The votes that actually matter. The process that actually determines the outcome. The names you need to know and what they're actually fighting for. Hit subscribe right now and let's decode this together. Let's start with the timeline of what Congress actually knew before Operation Epic Fury launched, because this is where the constitutional argument begins. On Tuesday, February 24th, 4 days before the strikes, Secretary of State Marco Rubio briefed the Gang of Eight for approximately 1 hour. The briefing was about the administration's approach to Iran. Congressional sources told CNN that the Gang of Eight members were not given the full legal justification for any potential operation. They were told military action might become necessary. They were not told it was imminent. They were not told the CIA had been tracking Khamenei for months. They were not told the timing had been adjusted to coincide with a rare gathering of Iran's top 40 officials. That Tuesday briefing was, by most accounts, a general strategic briefing, not a covert action notification, not a war authorization request. Then on Saturday morning, February 28th, while the bombs were already falling, Rubio called the Gang of Eight members to notify them. He reached 7 of the 8. One was unreachable. And then the Defense Department separately notified the House and Senate Armed Services Committees after the strikes had already commenced. Let that sequence sink in. Tuesday, general briefing on approach to Iran, no specifics. Saturday morning, notification call as bombs are already falling, no vote. Saturday morning, slightly later, Armed Services Committees informed, after the fact. That is the full extent of congressional involvement in the decision to launch the largest American military operation against Iran in history. No vote, no authorization, no formal request, no opportunity for Congress to say yes or no before American weapons were deployed against a foreign nation in an operation aimed explicitly at regime change. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, one of the Gang of Eight members who was notified, put it plainly. He said that by Trump's own words, American heroes might be lost. And that alone, he said, should have demanded the highest level of scrutiny, deliberation, and accountability. Instead, the president moved forward without seeking congressional authorization. That is a senator with access to classified intelligence, someone who was in the briefing, saying what happened was not enough. Before we can understand the vote that is coming, you need to understand what the War Powers Resolution actually is. Because most Americans have heard the phrase but couldn't explain what it means, here is the plain English version. In 1973, in the aftermath of the Vietnam War, a war that killed more than 58,000 Americans and was conducted for years without a formal declaration of war, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution over President Nixon's veto. The resolution was designed to reassert congressional authority over the decision to go to war. It requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing U.S. forces to armed conflict, and it limits unauthorized military engagement to 60 days, after which Congress must either formally authorize the operation or the president must withdraw the forces. The theory was simple. Congress was supposed to be the check on presidential war-making. The Constitution says so explicitly. Article 1 gives Congress the power to declare war, but Vietnam had shown that a president could drag the country into a prolonged, devastating conflict without ever asking Congress for permission. The War Powers Resolution was supposed to make sure that never happened again. In practice, it has never fully worked as intended. Every president since Nixon has argued, in one form or another, that the War Powers Resolution is an unconstitutional infringement on executive authority as commander-in-chief. The courts have consistently refused to settle the dispute. And so for 50 years, the executive branch has conducted military operations around the world, while Congress has largely watched from the sidelines, occasionally passing resolutions that have little practical effect. But here's what makes this week's vote different from every previous war powers battle. This time, the resolution is bipartisan. This time, it is privileged, meaning it is guaranteed a floor vote and cannot be buried in committee. This time, the vote is happening while an active military operation is underway. And this time, the math in Congress is so tight that the outcome is genuinely uncertain. Let's talk about the specific people driving this war powers push, because the coalition that is assembled around it is one of the most unusual in recent congressional history. Kenney is the lead sponsor of the Senate War Powers Resolution. He is not a fringe voice. He was Hillary Clinton's running mate in 2016. He has been one of the most consistent voices on congressional war powers for years, pushing similar resolutions on Yemen, Somalia, and Syria. When the Iran strikes launched, Kenney did not hedge. He called the strikes a colossal mistake. He said the Senate should immediately return to session and vote, and he said something that is the title of this video, that every single senator needs to go on the record. That phrase matters. Because what Kenney is doing is not just trying to stop the operation, he is trying to force accountability. He is saying, if you support this war, put your name on it. If you oppose it, put your name on that too. No more hiding behind presidential authority. No more avoiding the difficult vote. Every single senator on the record. Paul is Kenney's co-sponsor on the Senate resolution, and his presence changes everything about this story because Paul is not a Democrat. He is a Republican. He is a member of the president's own party. Paul's statement after the strikes is worth quoting in full, or nearly so. He said his first and purest instinct was to wish American soldiers safety and success, but he said his oath of office is to the Constitution, and he said that with studied care, he must oppose another presidential war. That is a Republican senator saying the president of his own party violated the Constitution. Massie is co-sponsoring the House version of the resolution with Democratic Representative Ro Khanna of California. Massie has been one of the most consistent non-interventionists in Congress, regardless of which party is in the White House. He called the Iran strikes acts of war, unauthorized by Congress. Period. No hedging. Khanna represents Silicon Valley. He is a progressive. He has been one of the strongest voices against American military interventionism from the left. His partnership with Massie, a libertarian-leaning conservative, is the kind of left-right coalition that almost never happens in Washington, but it is happening here, because the war powers question transcends party. It is about who in America decides to go to war. Now let's talk about what happened when senators were actually briefed, because the substance of those closed-door sessions is leaking out in ways that are very revealing. The gang of 8 members who were briefed before the strikes, specifically the notification call Rubio made Saturday morning, were not given what multiple sources described to CNN as a full accounting of the legal justification for the operation. They were told the strikes were happening. They were not told why. Legally, the administration believed it had the authority to conduct them without congressional approval. They were not given the specific intelligence that justified the timing, and they were not given any information about what the strategic endgame looked like. Representative Jim Himes of Connecticut, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, a gang of 8 member, walked out of his briefing and said publicly that everything he heard confirmed this was a war of choice with no strategic endgame. Senator Chuck Schumer demanded an immediate classified briefing for all senators, not just the gang of 8. He said the administration had not provided Congress and the American people with critical details about the scope and immediacy of the threat. Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, a Republican, posted on social media that he expected all members of Congress to be briefed about Operation Epic Fury. That is a member of the president's own party publicly saying the briefing process was insufficient. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, another Republican, said the strikes were presumably justified. Note that word, presumably. A senator who should have been briefed is using the word presumably because he doesn't actually know for certain, and Senator Todd Young of Indiana, yet another Republican, said he looked forward to Congress being fully briefed and included in discussions about next steps. He said the American people will have questions about the nature of threats, risks to troops, and objectives sought, and he said their questions must be answered. These are not Democrats attacking the president. These are members of his own party saying they were not given enough information about the most significant military operation of his presidency. Here's the critical question. The resolution is coming to a vote. But can it actually pass? Let's look at the math, because the numbers are genuinely tight in a way that makes this one of the most suspenseful votes in years. In the Senate, Republicans hold 53 seats and Democrats hold 47. A war powers resolution is privileged. It only needs 51 votes to pass. That means the resolution needs to pick up at least 4 Republican votes to overcome the Republican majority. We already know Rand Paul is a yes. That's one Republican. Tom Tillis has expressed discomfort but hasn't committed to a vote. That might be 2. Bill Cassidy voted for an Iran war powers resolution in 2020. He's hedging now but has a history of supporting congressional oversight. Potentially 3. Todd Young has called for full briefings and congressional inclusion. Possibly 4. That math is not impossible. It is genuinely close. But here is the complicating factor: the Venezuela precedent. Earlier this year, a war powers resolution to constrain Trump's actions in Venezuela initially had enough Republican support to advance in the Senate. And then, as the vote approached, enough Republicans changed their minds and the measure failed. The pattern is familiar. Senators express discomfort in public, they ask for briefings, they use words like presumably and I expect. And then, when the moment of decision arrives, they vote with the president. Roll Call, which covers congressional procedure more closely than almost any other outlet, reported bluntly that war powers votes are unlikely to rein in Trump after the Iran strikes, not because the argument is wrong, because the political pressure to stay loyal to a sitting president of your own party is almost always stronger than the constitutional principle at stake. Almost always, but not always. Let's talk about House Speaker Mike Johnson, because his position in this story is one of the most politically uncomfortable of any figure in Washington right now. Johnson has publicly supported the Iran strikes. He praised Trump's decision. He said congressional leaders had been briefed in detail that military action might become necessary. He is, by every public indication, aligned with the president on this operation. But Johnson also announced on Sunday that he plans to hold a war powers resolution vote in the House on Thursday. And then he told Republican members they need to vote against it. Think about what that position requires of him. He has to bring a resolution to the floor, because the resolution is privileged, meaning he legally cannot block it, while simultaneously whipping his members to vote it down. He has to manage a razor-thin one-vote majority in a situation where at least 3 Republicans, Massey, Davidson, and potentially others, have already signaled they will vote yes. If even 2 Republicans join with all House Democrats, the resolution passes, and Johnson's majority collapses on the most high-profile national security vote of the year. Johnson reminded members that attendance would be critical. That is the Speaker of the House on a war powers vote involving an active military operation, essentially telling his members, you need to show up and vote no, or this fails, or you face the consequences of going on record as having defied the president. That is an extraordinary amount of pressure for a constitutional principle that should not be a partisan question at all. Let's step back from the vote count and the party politics for a moment, because there is a deeper argument happening here that deserves to be heard clearly. The people pushing this war powers resolution, Caney, Paul, Massey, Khanna, are not primarily arguing about Iran. They are arguing about something more fundamental. They are arguing about who in America has the authority to send American men and women into harm's way. The Constitution is explicit. Article 1, Section 8 gives Congress the power to declare war, not the president, Congress. The founders made that choice deliberately. They had just fought a revolution against a king who could wage war by personal decree. They did not want to create a new system where one person could make the same decision. They designed a system where the most consequential decision a nation can make, the decision to go to war, required the consent of the people's representatives. Every time a president launches military action without congressional authorization, and Congress fails to respond with the constitutional check it was designed to provide, that design erodes a little more. The precedent shifts. The next president inherits a slightly more expansive claim to unilateral war-making authority, and the one after that inherits an even broader claim. That erosion has been happening for decades. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Operation Midnight Hammer last year, Operation Epic Fury this week. Each time the constitutional argument was made, each time the political calculus pushed Congress toward deference, and each time the president's unilateral authority expanded. Senator Rand Paul said something that cuts to the heart of this, and I want you to really hear it. He said the Constitution conferred the power to declare war on Congress for a reason and to make war less likely. The founders understood that a single person, unchecked, is more likely to go to war than a deliberative body of 535 people who represent the full spectrum of the American public. The decision to put American lives at risk should be hard. It should require argument and debate and votes and accountability, not a phone call at 2:30 in the morning. That is the argument. And whether you support Operation Epic Fury or oppose it, whether you think Iran needed to be confronted or think the operation was reckless and illegal, that argument deserves your full attention because it is about the architecture of the democracy you live in, and it does not get rebuilt easily once it is dismantled. Here's what I need you to take away from this video. This week, the United States Senate is going to vote on whether the president had the authority to launch Operation Epic Fury without their approval. The vote may pass, it may fail. If it passes, Trump will almost certainly veto it, and Congress almost certainly does not have the two-thirds majority needed to override that veto. So in the most direct, practical sense, the resolution may not change a single thing about what is happening on the ground in Iran. But Senator Tim Kaine said something that matters more than the outcome. He said every single senator needs to go on the record. And he is right, because the record matters. The names matter. The votes matter, not just for this operation, for the next one and the one after that. The historical record of who stood up for congressional war authority and who quietly stepped aside is the record that shapes what future presidents believe they can do. When Congress consistently declines to assert its constitutional authority, presidents consistently expand their claims to power. That is not a partisan observation. It is a 50-year pattern that has played out under Democrats and Republicans alike. This week's vote is a chance, maybe a small chance, but a real one, to interrupt that pattern, to put names on the record, to say publicly and formally that the Constitution means what it says about who decides to go to war. Whether your senator votes yes or no on this resolution, you deserve to know how they voted. You deserve to be able to hold them accountable for that vote. You deserve to understand what they believe about the limits of presidential power and the authority of the body you elected them to serve in. That is what this channel is here to help you do. If this video gave you something you needed to understand what is happening this week, share it right now. Send it to someone who should be watching this vote. Drop a comment and tell me how you think your senator should vote, because I want to hear what you think about this. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is your moment. The vote is happening this week. The debate is happening in real time, and we are going to be here, breaking down every development, every name, every vote as it happens. This is Senate Decode. I'll see you in the next one.